This is the Let's Get Real Estate Show with your host, Danielle Chason.
Full-time investor, strategic consultant, motivational coach, sought-after speaker,
and host of your #1 real estate investing show, Let's Get Real Estate,
where real people are doing real estate.
Hey, everybody, and welcome back to the Let's Get Real Estate podcast. I am your host, Danielle Chason, and today I'm excited to have Michael Richter join us. Woo, woo. Hey, Mike. How's it going?
I'm doing amazing, Danielle. How are you?
Oh my God, I'm fantastic. I'm super excited to share your story with the world today because we're going to talk about a couple of things that we haven't yet had on our podcast. And I know you and I have gone back and forth with the whole pre-construction idea and whether it was a good plan in the beginning or not, and hindsight looking back. And I'm so excited to talk about how it served you and what you would do different and sharing with everybody. I'm super stoked about that. Before we get started though, Mike, do you want to share a little bit, introduce yourself to the audience and a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Sure. So my name is Michael Richter. And by the way, Danielle, it's a pleasure to be on your podcast. So how I got started, this is the way I got started. So I was the typical, I've got a trades, I've got an HVAC background, and I was working, 60 hours a week at the time. This was back in 2013 when we decided to pull the trigger on our first property. And I realized I was exchanging my time for money, and that's kind of the only gear I knew. And I knew that if I ever wanted to experience a different lifestyle, if I ever wanted to have control of my own time, make extra money, have the ideal lifestyle that I really wanted to, I couldn't just be going down the same route and working overtime, working weekends, and working late every evening, especially the fact that we were planning on having a family in the next couple of years. So how I got into real estate, I didn't do the traditional route where you go out, you get mentorship, you buy a property, and then you start scaling from there. I really only had the intentions to buy a couple of properties, make life easier in the future, but I didn't really understand why I was getting into it. I only knew that real estate makes people pretty wealthy, and that's just about all I knew. So when I met my wife, we decided when we were going to get married, we were going to purchase our first property. We wanted to stay in the same town, and what we did instead of buying a bigger property and sort of pushing our means, we bought something that was well within our means. Okay, a single detached home where we could raise a family of 4 in. But what I really wanted to do, and this is where I kind of had to push my wife to get on board, but I also had vetoing power because I was the only one on title at the time. I wanted to keep my first townhouse that I bought and just turn that into a rental property. So basically change the use. Jen didn't push back very much because I was I was dead set on doing that. This was in September. Sorry.
Yeah, now doing that, because I remember, so you told me like when you and Jen got together, because you already had your place, you had read Rich Dad Poor Dad. Up until like when you did this, you didn't have a whole lot of like real estate knowledge, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, and then you read Rich Dad Poor Dad, and you just knew that, hey, you know what? I don't want to give it up. I want to hang on to it, right? Because Jen, didn't she want you to? And just for my audience, I'm pretty good friends with Jen and Mike. But anyway, so Jen, so I kind of know a little bit of the backstory, but Jen wanted you to sell and apply that equity that you had in the townhouse towards your new principal home, right? And so that, I think that's the mindset that everybody has, really, is like, you know what, just build and, keep putting equity in your home and get your house paid off. And that was probably kind of the mindset that Jen had at the time, right?
Mm-hmm. And she did, because she didn't understand. And remember, I was right behind her, but we had the mindset too, and I was up there until that point. I got a little bit of prior real estate knowledge before that through a weekend boot camp. And before that, I would have been on board with Jen. I would have thought, you know what, the best asset is your home. I would have believed that you have to pay down your mortgage as soon as possible, because that's just a common belief around society. But after taking that real estate course, and then after that book, Real Estate, Rich Dad Poor Dad, fell into my hand, I realized that I had to change course, and I couldn't just do the status quo, pay down your mortgage, and wow, woohoo, you're mortgage free. So that's how there's a little bit of pushback, but that's how we did it. That's how we got into it. put tenants in there, and then a matter of months into it, I realized, my mortgage is getting paid down, all of the expenses are getting paid, and I've got a little bit of cash flow, a little bit of profit back then at the time in my pocket every month. Come, let's see, February the following year, a friend came up to us, and I had no intentions. I wanted to buy another property, but I just had no idea how. I had no mentorship back then. There was no podcast. There was no really good books to read on how to do it, and no team, no resources to reach out to. But I had a friend who I talked to real estate investing about, and one afternoon he came up to me. Him and his girlfriend were in line to buy an investment property, and he says, "Mike, there's a big builder in town. They're releasing, well, it was Mattamy Homes. They're releasing a new release tomorrow." And we basically, my girlfriend told the company that they had to get tickets at the time, and they told the company that her name was Jen. "We got this ticket for you guys. We hope you'll use it, but you have to make a decision by the end of the day and go there tomorrow morning and buy your house." So basically what they gave us was a number. That ticket was a number in line. And I told this to Jen, and Jen was like, "No way. Like, why would we want to buy a third property and get into more debt?" Like, she just didn't have the same vision I had. But rightfully so, I had no ability to sell the idea, to crunch numbers, to show her a pro forma, to show her the overall strategy. I just didn't know how to present that the way I do now and explain that and sell that vision to her. So for her, she could see the risk. And for me, I was just like, well, let's just buy more real estate. This sounds like a good idea. I read about it in the book and took a course on it. So we were at odds. We went there the next day. I had to convince Jen. Thank goodness she listened to me, and we bought the property. We went into a little bit of debt with the down payment. We didn't have the cash at the time, and I didn't know how I was going to come up with the down payment, but I knew I was very determined to buy that property. And it was only a 6-month closing, and it was almost $100K we needed to close on that property. So I was resourceful. I mean, Jen and I were looking for resources at the time. We were both working full time, so we had good incomes. We had a conversation with one mortgage broker, and he looked at our portfolio. Well, he looked at the one property we had that was my original property, and he says, "You guys have plenty of equity in here to buy that property. Why don't we just do a cash out refinance, add a segment to that mortgage, and you guys don't need to put any of your own money down." And for me, that was just a no-brainer. And that additional down payment that we pulled from my first property, the debt on that was covered by the tenants anyway, because I had some cash flow coming off of that property. So then after we did that, we found another excellent set of tenants. And now by now, I was starting to pull a team together, a mortgage broker, I had agents, I was networking, I was starting to get educated. And Jen was starting to come on board and believe in me. But for her, it was always just, she didn't see the big picture the way I did. So it was kind of a fight every time we bought a property, because I just had no ability to show her the upside. And she was seeing the risk because she wasn't invested the way I was and going out there the way I was and learning about this. I just wasn't being able to deliver that information the way I should have to her and looking after her needs. I wasn't doing that. I was really only looking after my needs, and that's become wealthy and become independent. And she just wanted to keep the roof over her head so we could have a family and not go bankrupt. So that was kind of the pressure we were under at the time, the divide we were between.
So I want to pause there for a minute because, like, I happen to know, again, because I know you guys personally, I happen to know that you're extremely passionate about real estate. I mean, since, like, I knew you at the beginning of your journey, since you hit the ground running, you've not looked back and you've not slowed down. And you're very passionate about real estate. And Jen, on the other hand, she's like, absolute, I don't want to say hate, it's a really strong word, but it's absolutely not her passion. She's on the opposite end of the spectrum. And in the spirit of keeping it real on the Let's Get Real Estate podcast, like, this is a challenge that I think a lot of people have. And I think it's really, it would be really beneficial if you could maybe share with us how you overcame and how you got Jen on board. And I mean, we've talked about this before. You've told me, like, Jen was seeing the risks where I was seeing the benefits. So you guys were focusing on very different things, right? She wanted safety security in having a home that was getting paid down, and you wanted investments where you were having something building for your retirement, for your future, for your family. And so I would love for you, like, just to take 2 minutes to try to expand a little bit and articulate for the audience to understand how you got your partner on board.
Well, the reality is that I didn't get Jen on board, right? There was no,
That's
there's
keeping
the
it real
difference.
right there.
And this is the difference. I talk to so many couples and they're like, oh, we're in it. We're both 100% or we're both 50-50 on the business. And I'm like, well, who got who into who? And they're like, oh, no, we're both equal. The difference is that I was kind of denying this to myself and I was kind of numbing out certain things. And I was looking after more of my own needs than I was Jen's, and she was never really on board. I mean, real estate wasn't her passion. It's like you said, I love talking about real estate. I love all aspects of real estate. There's some stuff I don't, but I can talk about real estate nonstop because I'm passionate. That's just what I love talking about because of what it does for people's lives. Jen
Trust me,
wasn't,
I know.
and sometimes I just wouldn't shut up about real estate. So we had to create boundaries where I wouldn't come home every night and bounce all of my ideas and visions and problems off of her. And I also had to be a little bit realistic. Jen, we made certain ultimatums where she'd help me with the business and I had to help with other things, right? But what I failed to realize is that Jen was never into real estate. It was never her passion in the first place, and it wasn't her place to get involved. But what I did need Jen for is, certain things like there's certain legal aspects, there's organization tasks that I didn't like doing. There's, we used to do in the beginning our own bookkeeping, all of our own administrative stuff. We had no systems in place when we started. So it was hectic because, all this paperwork would come in and we didn't know how to organize it. But then Jen put all of those systems in place for me to finally be successful. And if you fast forward to today, Jen only looks after things that she wants, and Jen is no longer really in the business. And Jen's focused on, living the life that she wants to do. I mean, she's able to retire from her job. She's focusing on stuff and being an awesome mom and having very, very high standards as a mother, and not me going around saying, Jen, we need to file this, we need to put this away. How does this work? I can't find that. All these things are in place now, and we have very, very clear and organized systems, and we have a whole funnel. When information comes in, we have a whole contingency plan. We actually have systems and operations behind our business that we didn't have before. And that's thanks to Jen putting that together for me, to the point where Jen comes in and does what she needs to, and she's very supportive of whatever I need. But I don't need to go to Jen anymore for business support and try to stretch her and go to her late at night and say, Jen, I can't figure out this. I've got the right people that I can bounce those ideas, go to for help me with whatever documents I need. That helps now. So that's taken a lot of pressure off of our relationship, and that allows us to focus on our family. It allows us to focus on our intimacy. Jen is a lot less stressed out. And one of the things that I didn't realize, one of the most important things that I didn't realize this whole time, is that we, like men and women, we're not wired differently. Everybody's wired differently. And for Jen, having, two young kids at home, Jen wants to make sure that we don't go bankrupt. Jen wants to make sure there's food on the table, money in our bank accounts. And that's a value that's important to her as a mom. Me, on the other hand, I mean, honestly, I'll put a lot on the line, and I have a much, much, much higher risk tolerance than Jen, because I know that whatever happens, we have the right resources. We're going to mitigate any sort of risk as much as possible. And I am able to expose myself to a certain level of risk in exchange for a certain reward down the road. I see that vision. But how we change that, and it's really important, is that we actually worked with coaches, like relationship coaches and business coaches, over the past year, so I could get to a higher level. Our relationship, our business, our real estate, we want to take this to a higher level. So we hired people that are far ahead of us in the whole success journey, and we kind of unravel things, and that's why we sold a couple of our properties. And one of the things that Jen really wanted was a certain number in her bank account, a certain amount of money. And in the past, I've always been like, oh, Jen, we've got all this equity, we've got lines of credit that we can dip into. That's our contingency plan. But it was a lot different for her, and I was ignoring that. So now what we did is I have to keep a certain amount of money, and that amount of money is always going to grow depending on the amount that our portfolio grows in proportion to that. And it was difficult for me because I like to have money invested. I don't like to have cash sitting on the sidelines. But for Jen, I mean, you know what? That was one of the things that I wanted to do to keep her happy and make her feel safe. And that's worked very well over the past almost a year now.
And I love that because ultimately, real estate can satisfy both of your needs if you're listening to each other and willing to communicate that. And I love that you got coaching, got therapy,
Mhm.
and spoke to, a personal coach in order to be able to hear each other. And I think that's probably one of the biggest challenges is, as with a spouse, you're trying to get your spouse on board and sell them on
Mhm.
your idea, and you're not really respecting what their needs are in that process. So I think that's really key and important.
Mhm.
And being able to identify, like, I'm just going to respect her beliefs and what's important to her,
Mhm.
while she does the same with me, and then let's find a way to, blend it together and work together. I love that. I love that. And you know what? You just proved to my audience that you don't need to have your spouse on board
Mhm.
per se in order to make it work. They don't need to be with you in the business.
Mhm.
And to your point, your relationship is much healthier and happier because, there's that stress is gone. So work doesn't actually interfere. I remember having a conversation with Jen. I don't know if I should say this, but I remember having a conversation with Jen going, like, every time we go to bed, like, we just talk about real estate for an hour and a half. And I'm like, I know. He calls me at 10 o'clock at night. I know. Because you and I are both passionate about real estate, and we could, like, have these conversations and just go on about a contractor. But, at the end of the day, the issue is that if it's starting to negatively impact your relationships, you really got to take a look and see how it's going to work in a healthy way. So thank you for sharing that.
And
I
one of the
love
things
that.
we did is we created dead zone. So I know how to read Jen a lot better now because I wasn't being very mindful of our relationship when it came to real estate because I thought, well, we can talk about it because it's made us so much money, it's built so much equity, and there's so much of a future. This is our future, our ticket to freedom. That I thought it was fair game. We could talk about it all the time. But Jen didn't want to hear about the ups and downs at 10 o'clock at night. And
Mhm.
I was talking about it all the time. And now we have blackout periods, but where we just don't talk about it. Like you don't talk about it in the bedroom. You don't
Mhm.
talk about it past a certain time. So I know when to be very mindful and zip up and text someone like yourself, Danielle, if there's something we need to talk about. But you know what? For me, it took hiring coaches actually to see that, to see, like, I couldn't. It was a blind spot. I'd call that a blind spot because I was just kind of rambling on. I wasn't looking at the big picture with Jen, and it was putting stress on her, and she'd kind of just nod, but she was actually becoming resentful of me doing that. So by having an outside party come in and people that we really trust and respect, they kind of shone a light on that, and we worked with them. And you know what? It's not perfect. We're not a perfect couple, but it's made our relationship so much better. And it's still a work in process. We still have challenges, but by working with other people to sort of look at it from outside with a non-judgmental, non-biased point of view, it's made our relationship so much better, right? To the point where it's not just about growing real estate, but it's about our relationship first and our own goals first. And real estate only really supports us. So now, for example, we're talking about selling another property, and instead of me going out and saying I'll buy 5 more properties with the proceeds, the first thing I'm doing is I said, Jen, this is the money that I want to put this in our account. How does that sound, right? And she's like, that's great. And by the way, that kitchen you've always wanted that we put off since we bought the house, we're going to take some of the profits, and I want you to start designing the kitchen that you've always wanted, and the floors and the finishes. We're going to redo our own house. So now we have conversations about that. We have conversations about where we're going to have dinner, where we're going to travel next, what we're going to do with our kids and family. So we're focusing on stuff that we like, abundant things that we want to as a family. And I've got people in my network now, coaches, that I can bounce all of my crazy ideas off and problems with, and things that are happening with contractors and deals going sideways. That's all taken care of. I don't need to bounce those things and run in saying, "Oh my God, what are we going to do about this?" Right? So our relationship has really taken a turn for the better in the past year since we've been doing this.
Yeah, I think it's really important to have boundaries. And like I said, I remember when you guys, one of the first boundaries you did was no real estate talk in the bedroom. And that
Mm-hmm.
was one of the first things. And that was a huge one for you guys. So for
Mm-hmm.
those of you listening, if your partner is not passionate about real estate like you are, no real estate in the bedroom. But anyway, so I really want to circle back to the pre-construction, because
Sure.
I personally think the pre-construction was a great strategy for you. We often look back on our real estate journeys, and when we first got in, the first property or second 2, 3 properties we got into or whatever, we go, "Oh my God, if I knew better, I would have done things so much different." That's okay, because you got to get into the game. You got to start somewhere, and the first time it's not going to be the best. maybe strategy because you just don't have all the knowledge,
Mhm.
and that's okay. And I know you've shared with me, well, maybe looking back, I probably would have done it different. But I think for the amount of knowledge you had and for your situation at the time, um, I think it was a great strategy, the pre-construction, because both of you worked full time. You had a small family, but I want to talk about the challenges you had doing pre-construction. So
Mhm.
you really didn't switch strategies until you got 7 pre-construction. You
Mhm.
were buying about one a year. I think it was a little bit more than that actually, but about one a year, and
Mhm.
then um, and then you started getting educated and shifted strategies. But until then, though, and you were doing the pre-construction, people do hit a wall. So I'd
Mhm.
love to talk about the challenges you had, so anybody else who's out there who's got a full-time job and uses this as a strategy to help them kind of overcome. So what was one of the challenges that you've had along the pre-construction way?
So some of the strategies we had, it depends how you look at it. But some of the strategies, or some of the challenges that we had were, depending really how we're looking at this, is, I mean, we weren't necessarily able to afford $100,000 down payment on average to put down and leave in these properties for a matter of years before they appreciated enough. And one of the reasons why we couldn't just refinance one of the existing properties is because the numbers just didn't work well because there's only a single income. It wasn't a duplex, it wasn't a triplex, so we didn't have this lavish income coming in, streaming in off of these properties. So the bank really didn't like financing them. The only reason why we did get financing is because we had great jobs at the time, interest rates were okay, and the rents were going up. So it was definitely a challenge to find the equity to close because we couldn't just draw it at certain points. But then it was also a challenge to get financed because at the time I didn't understand all of my resources. All I do really is go out, try to find the cheapest mortgage, and closing the deal and closing the property. But sometimes the cheapest interest rate with one of the big banks wasn't necessarily the best vehicle going forward because it wasn't the product to allow us to scale. So we'd always hit these bottlenecks, and we'd always get an exception at the time, and we were able to do that. But definitely, yeah, qualifying and coming up with down payment was a challenge. The other challenge that we faced too was closings. So sometimes builders, what they do, smaller builders will do this, is that what they'll do is they'll promise a really close closing date, a quick sale, a quick close, which is great for marketing. The majority of people buying these are buying them, they want to move in. But what builders do, if sales don't go the way they want and they're trying to speculate and hedge the prices up higher and higher, what they'll do is they'll just give you a delay and another delay and another delay and another delay. And then there's all kinds of unforeseen costs. There's conservation authorities getting involved. There's development challenges. There's weather challenges. So some of our properties, like the last properties we bought, were delayed between almost a year and a year and a half. Those two properties. And after having those delays, and trying to close another property in the meantime, there's just too many variables. I mean, to be delayed that long, the interest rates had gone up, our personal financial situation had changed because we closed on other properties. So it became very difficult and challenging to qualify because we're now pushed into the future with these closings. And I decided, there's too many variables with this to start depending on these builders to close in the range where they said they were. That was one of it too. And another challenge, what was some of the other challenges too that we faced? It was just, yeah, I think it's closing down the line. I remember the mortgage stress test, for example, because when we closed, it was so far into the future that the stress test came in, and all of a sudden that again really hindered our qualification power, right? So those were challenges too. And then trying to do upgrades to a property, I always have a certain standard. I always like to do things a certain way. But builders charge through the roof for certain upgrades. And I've got a good understanding of construction and cost to do certain renovation projects. And I was just never seeing eye to eye what the value was for what the builder was charging and what we could get the job done for in terms of upgrades and alterations and different layouts, right? I always wanted to get my hands involved. And that was a no-go zone unless you want to open up your wallet and spend thousands and thousands of dollars to do certain upgrades.
Well, and truthfully, I think the upgrades is, this is going to be a rental. It's not your primary
Mm-hmm.
residence, and I think a lot of newbies when they start out in real estate, they always overdo a house when they're doing a flip or even new construction. Like you said, you want it to be gorgeous, but it's already gorgeous built as a base model because it's brand new and it's got all the up-to-date kind of specs in it. So it, you know, it looks really good the way it is. So I think that was a good call on your part. But coming back to, you know, your challenges, coming up the down payment, getting the financing, not having any control over the construction delays, and not being able to have that kind of, you know, control on your own projects ultimately can make it quite difficult. But with the down payment, I'm curious how you did manage to get those, you know, 7 properties in, you know, the 5 years that you got them. How were you able to get them and come up with the down payment, um, and still get that qualifying? Is there, you know, did you change your strategy, or did you structure it a certain way in order to be able to qualify with the banks? Did you work with a specific bank? Maybe you can share a little bit more about that.
I didn't work with a specific bank at the time. At the time, I was just going out shopping for the cheapest interest rate because I always believed that we'd just buy one more and just buy one more and one more. So I wasn't necessarily looking to work with a broker at the time to look for the right product that would allow me to scale. So the flip side, I was getting pretty good interest rates because we're qualifying still with one of the big five banks. Well, actually, no, I shouldn't say that. The last two new builds we bought was with Desjardins. We did pay a little bit more in mortgage because they're a credit union, but they gave us a couple. Their lending guidelines were a little bit looser than one of the federally regulated banks. But it was definitely tough. I mean, some of the money we had to put in, we had to work very, very hard to front some of those down payments in the meantime before we could refinance a property, pull equity out, which we could at points, but it was never really when it was convenient for us. And we could never pull out the full amount of equity that we wanted to at whatever the property value was appraised at, less 20% for the down payment. So that was a challenge, right? We had to work very, very hard to put a lot of our own hard-earned money into this strategy to, to make this work. And what I realized is that, you know, we bought these properties in that time frame and we did well. There's lots of equity when you fast forward to today, to the present. But at the time, it was really, really hindering my growth because there were only single door incomes. You know, instead of getting $3,500 for the top and bottom of the duplex, or maybe $4,500 for something with a triplex on it, and having those numbers, we were getting maybe at the time $2,000 to $2,200 in rent. That's what we're getting currently today. So the numbers really aren't supportive of mortgage qualification power and making that portfolio really shine with cash flow coming out and really juicing up those numbers to make a bank look at this and say, you know what, your portfolio is able to grow and pull this equity out. That's the real challenge when it comes to scalability with single door properties at the price points we were buying them at, and especially today's price points. So for myself, I'd probably never do a single family again unless it was for a flip. And I don't recommend that unless it's just you want something very passive. You just want to hand the money to the builder. You've got lots of time, and maybe you only want a couple of properties, depending on where you're buying at. That strategy might work for you, but for me, it definitely doesn't work for cash flow, and it definitely doesn't work when it comes to scaling up a portfolio.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people, what they don't realize, like even though like you're going to buy this property, let's say I'm just going to use round easy numbers. Let's say you're buying it pre-construction at 500,000 and maybe when it's finished it's worth 580. You're not necessarily going to get the financing for the 580 because it's dependent on what your debt service ratio is and how much income you're collecting from that tenant.
Mhm.
And so you may be only able to get financed for 350, which is not, you know, 80% loan to value of the property. And it may not even be 80% loan to value on what you bought it from the builder. So it is a tricky game when it comes to the numbers on pre-construction. So definitely, you know, to the audience, if you're going to look at pre-construction, just be aware of that because your debt service will qualify you for a certain amount. And if you've paid more than what the bank qualifies you for, you have to make up the difference. So coming back to where you got the money
Mhm.
for the down payment and the money to close, for the closing costs and all of that, like did you guys, so I know on your first one you borrowed the money. It was 20K you needed initially for the initial down
Hmm.
payment on that first one. How did you, like, that was on credit. So you used other property you had to refi and get that money back. Did you borrow from from close friends and family as well, or was it just all on credit that you did that with?
No, we ramped up. Well, that's a good question. So we started to develop that line of credit, and we had that available. And in the meantime, I think to close the second one, we used a lot of our own cash. Like we kicked and scraped and put money towards that property, and it was a lot of sacrifice. I mean, Jen was working full time. I
Mhm.
was working full time at the time, and we had surplus money, so we were able to come up with a certain amount of down payment. But then what we were doing is we were borrowing. Like at sometimes I'd close on money on like a credit card if I needed to, or I'd close on a personal line of credit. But I also knew
Right.
that with the property values rising, that first property we refinanced that again to buy our third property, right? So like on some of these original properties, I've got infinity returns, and I've refinanced them again to buy our latter property. So we literally have no money invested in these Milton properties and these Milton deals, right? And we've been able to pull out all of our cash, but that took a time. It wasn't the time frame we wanted. We were kind of at the whim of the appraisers at the bank at the time, and we really had to allow the property values to go up. And it was just a matter of being really, really patient to access that really, really cheap money that was secured against the property. That took some time. So it took some hard work in between, and that's also what limited us to it. That small number that we bought is because we couldn't just go out and buy five. We could only maybe buy one because we were using a lot of sweat equity at the time to put the down payments into them,
And using your own money. Yeah.
or
When you
our
use
money.
other people's money, and yeah, when you partner with other people, it is you're able to scale a little bit faster. But I love how you say that, it was a, a lot of sacrifice and a lot of patience.
There was.
Um and the patience, actually, like, for what you did and the timeline you did it, I think it is actually really good because you happened to be in an appreciating market and did really well. Usually you can't refinance until at least 5 years
Hmm.
before you can really collect any equity out. So
Hmm.
you were able to do it within 2-3 years. So that was, just being in an appreciating market was, super helpful, and it did, I think, fast forward that process for you. But sacrifice, that's the word, I think, that's really important here.
Hmm.
Um, and I think a lot of people have a hard time understanding that the real estate game is not easy. It does come with a sacrifice. I've done it, you've done it, and literally everybody on my podcast, um, everybody that I know in real estate has sacrificed at some point in order to build their business or build their portfolio to where it is today. So
Hmm.
I appreciate that. So listen, Mike, I know now you've gone on, you're not doing pre-construction anymore. You've gone on to bigger and better things. I love that. So you're doing duplex conversions, you're doing burst strategies, you're doing multi units, and now you're doing ADUs on your single family and duplexes on your
Hmm.
smaller properties. And ADU meaning accessory dwelling units.
Hmm.
And I love all of that. Might have to bring you back and talk about that because there's so much knowledge that you have to share with the world. But if anybody wanted to talk about pre construction or anything else and connect with you, I know that you've got a couple of accounts on Instagram. Would it be okay if they DM'd you? Are your DMs open?
Absolutely. I'm always happy. I'm always happy to connect with people and share my knowledge. It's great. I think it's great when people reach out and create a dialogue and keep the conversation going. So anybody can feel free to reach out to me.
So, for those of you who are listening, if you want to reach out to Mike, that's an open invitation. You can reach out to him on his personal IG account, which is at Michael K. Richter. That's Michael is Michael K. Richter is Richter. Or you can check out his business IG account, which is at Double E Properties. So just like it sounds, DOUBLEE PROPERTIES. So, and I think if they wanted to reach out to you by email, is that okay as well?
That's sure. That's fine.
Which is also doubleeproperties@gmail.com. So, guys, that's going to be, and it's already up in his bio, on his bio page on the website, let'sgetrealestatepodcast.com. So, if you're looking for Mike, just check him out there. It's let'sgetrealestatepodcast.com, and just go to the guest bio page, and then you'll find Michael there. Other than that, Michael, do you have any last words of wisdom to share with the audience?
I think, how do you say it? I think I was thinking about this today. I was actually thinking with that Danielle is a good closer, a good last little bit of advice. And one of the things that I think is important is to put everything into perspective and don't necessarily get caught up living somebody else's dream or their strategy. And I say that because I had a lot of opportunity in the beginning to buy more properties, more duplex conversions, properties that could have easily held a larger unit. But I was just really focused on, for so many years I was focused on, well, we're new build experts. This is what we do. That's kind of our identity. That I left a lot of good opportunity on the table because I realized, I thought at some points the market was just too expensive, or, we're past the peak where things are affordable. And you know what? In hindsight, there's even today there's a lot of good opportunity on the table. But I was kind of listening to background noise, and I was getting caught up in that. And because of that, I wasn't really focused on the opportunity that was really on the table and making the numbers work. And maybe that meant adding a duplex, or maybe that meant taking a building and changing the use and adding a triplex or an additional dwelling unit that we're doing now. So becoming really clear on what you're trying to do and just focusing on a strategy that works for you with your skill set, with your time frame, with your ability, that's what's going to get you ahead. And stop listening necessarily to people say, well, the market's outpriced itself and the numbers don't work anymore. No, this is where you need to do your due diligence and decide if it works for you, and shut out all of the noise, because there's a lot of naysayers out there. And I was getting caught up on that for a little while, and now I don't. Now I trust people, and I listen to people that I trust and that I aspire to, and that's it.
I love that. Shut out all the noise.
Mm-hmm.
Again, I think it's easy to just chase those squirrels, but you got to look at yourself first to realize what's the right strategy for you. Mr. Michael Richter, I appreciate having you on. I appreciate you taking the time. I know you're a busy guy, sharing your story and your knowledge with our audience. Thank you so much, my friend. Woo, woo. Big shout out to you. Thank you. For those of you that are still with us, thank you for still listening to the podcast. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share if you think this is valuable to others. And always, always, always comment in the notes below, because I want to hear what your story is. I want to hear what you want to hear from us. So if you have any episode stories, any topics that you want covered, any guests, feel free to introduce them to me. I'm here for you, my friends. So don't forget to share and comment, and always subscribe. This is Danielle Chason for the Let's Get Real Estate podcast. Thanks again for being here. Until next week, ciao for now.